When nothing is wrong, but nothing is changing. There are days when nothing is wrong. No crisis. No collapse. No moment you can point to and say, this is where it broke. From the outside, everything looks fine. Life moves. Responsibilities are handled. You show up enough to stay afloat. And yet, something feels off. Not pain. Not urgency. Just a quiet sense that you're living beneath your potential. There are people who wake up like this. Not exhausted. Just tired enough to negotiate with themselves. The alarm rings. The phone is reached for. 5 more minutes, they say. Not because they need rest, but because starting feels heavier than staying. 5 minutes becomes 15. Not out of laziness. Out of comfort. They get up eventually. Move through the day. Do what's required. But not what matters most. The difficult task is postponed. The discipline is delayed. The promise to themselves is softened. And nothing pushes back. That's how comfort works. It doesn't stop you. It delays you. Now listen carefully. At some point, this stopped being about them. This is about you. You know these moments. The pause before effort. The excuse that sounds reasonable. The decision to start tomorrow instead of now. You don't call it avoidance. You call it being patient with yourself. And sometimes, that is kindness. But other times, it's sedation. Comfort doesn't feel dangerous. That's why it's effective. It tells you there's time. It tells you you deserve ease. It tells you you'll do it later, when the mood is better, when life is calmer, when motivation returns. And slowly, quietly, something changes. Not your ability. Your self-trust. Because every time you say, I'll start tomorrow, and don't, a part of you stops believing you. That is the silent cost of comfort. It doesn't ruin your life. It puts it on pause. You don't lose ambition. You lose momentum. You don't lose discipline. You stop practicing it. And one day, you look around and realize you've been safe for a long time. But you haven't been growing. This audiobook is not about forcing yourself. And it's not about living in discomfort. It's about learning to recognize when comfort is helping you, and when it's quietly controlling you. Because comfort is not peace. Peace strengthens you. Comfort dulls you. And discipline doesn't begin with intensity. It begins with honesty. If you're willing to look at the moments you keep negotiating with yourself, you're ready for what comes next. Let's begin. What you've just noticed isn't failure. It's familiar. And familiarity has a quiet influence. Before we talk about change, we need to understand what comfort really looks like. When it's shaping a life. That's where we begin. Let's look closer. Chapter 1. Comfort doesn't look like a problem. Comfort doesn't arrive like a warning. It doesn't knock loudly. It doesn't announce itself as dangerous. It blends in. It looks like a routine. Like normal life. Like this is just how things are now. There was a period when everything felt manageable. Not exciting. Not terrible. Just manageable. They woke up most mornings on time. Not early, but not late enough to cause trouble. Work was done. Messages answered. Responsibilities met. From the outside, nothing looked wrong. And that was the first disguise. Because when nothing looks wrong, nothing demands change. Comfort thrives there. There were things they meant to do. Not urgent things. Important things. The kind of things you don't get punished for delaying. A habit they wanted to build. A skill they wanted to return to. A version of themselves they kept saying they'd get back to. Those things stayed in the background. Always present. Never pressing. Each day, they thought about starting. Each day, something felt more immediate. Not an emergency. Just comfort. Rest instead of effort. Ease instead of friction. Later instead of now. And because nothing bad happened, the choice felt harmless. That's how comfort survives scrutiny. Comfort doesn't feel like avoidance. It feels reasonable. I've had a long day. I'll do it when I have more energy. I don't want to rush it. Those words sound mature. They sound like self-care. And sometimes they are. But comfort rarely tells you when it crosses the line. It never says, stop growing. It says, not today. And then it says it again tomorrow. Over time, something subtle began to change. Not their ability. Not their intelligence. Their relationship with themselves. They started trusting their comfort more than their intention. When a thought appeared, I should do this now, another thought followed immediately. It can wait. And the second thought usually won. Not because it was stronger. Because it was kinder. Comfort doesn't overpower you. It persuades you. There was a moment they noticed this. Not in a dramatic way. It happened quietly, one evening. They were about to sit down, the day already done in their mind. And the thought came again. You could do it now. They paused. Not because they were considering action, but because they were preparing an explanation. They felt it forming before they said it. I'm tired. I'll be better tomorrow. The explanation arrived easily. Too easily. That's when something clicked. They realized how fluent they'd become in delay. Comfort had taught them a language. A language where effort was optional. Where discipline was postponed. Where intention was always future tense. They didn't feel lazy. They felt calm. And that calm felt like peace. But it wasn't. Peace restores you. Comfort sedates you. Peace strengthens your ability to act. Comfort makes action feel unnecessary. The strange thing was, they still saw themselves as disciplined. They still believed they were capable. Nothing had happened to challenge that identity. No failure. No collapse. Just a growing gap between belief and behavior. And because the gap didn't hurt, it went unnoticed. Comfort doesn't remove your goals. It softens their edges. They become thoughts instead of commitments. Ideas instead of actions. You don't abandon them. You place them gently on a shelf called someday. And someday I feel safe. Someday I won't ask anything from you now. There were moments of quiet frustration. Not anger. Not despair. Just a feeling that life was slightly underlived. That something was being held back. They ignored it most days. Noise helped. Busyness helped. Comfort helped. But discomfort has a way of waiting patiently. It doesn't chase you. It waits until you're still. Until the noise fades. Until you're alone with yourself. And then it asks a simple question. Is this who you want to become? Not in accusation. In honesty. That question doesn't demand an answer immediately. It just sits there. And comfort rushes to respond. You're fine. You're doing okay. There's time. And again, maybe there is. But time isn't the issue. Practice is. Discipline doesn't disappear because you lack will. It fades because it's no longer practiced. And comfort is very good at interrupting practice. This chapter isn't about rejecting ease. It's about recognizing when ease starts choosing for you. When rest turns into delay. When patience turns into avoidance. When kindness toward yourself turns into lowered standards. Not because you don't care, but because nothing hurts enough to force clarity. Comfort doesn't look like a problem. That's why it lasts. That's why it feels safe. And that's why it quietly shapes lives. Not by destruction. By postponement. Awareness is the first interruption. No action yet. Just seeing. Because the moment you recognize a comfort's voice, it stops sounding like truth. And in the next chapter, we'll look at what comfort is actually protecting you from, and why facing the discomfort feels so threatening. Stay with me. Nothing changes yet. But everything has been named. Once you see comfort clearly, you start to notice something else. It isn't just delaying action. It's protecting you from something. Not exhaustion. Not overwhelmed. Something deeper. In the next chapter, we'll explore what comfort is really shielding you from, and why stepping outside feels heavier than it should. Let's continue. Chapter 2. What comfort is protecting you from? Comfort doesn't protect you from effort. That's the first misunderstanding. Effort is visible. Effort is explainable. Comfort protects you from something quieter. Exposure. From the moment you consider doing something that actually matters, your body reacts before your mind does. Not with panic. Not with fear. With hesitation. That hesitation isn't laziness. It's self-awareness colliding with uncertainty. There was something they had been avoiding. It wasn't dramatic. No deadline. No pressure from anyone else. That was exactly why it mattered. It belonged entirely to them. If they did it, there would be no one else to blame. No external reason for failure. Just effort and outcome. Comfort stepped in immediately. Not loudly. Not forcefully. It arrived as a suggestion. You've had a long day. There's no rush. You'll do better when you feel ready. Those thoughts didn't feel like resistance. They felt like they cared. And that's how comfort gains trust. Comfort protects your identity. Not your future. Your current image of yourself. As long as something remains undone, you can still believe you're capable of it. The belief remains untested. Safe. Trying changes that. Trying replaces imagination with reality. Reality demands humility. Comfort avoids humility. There's safety in potential. Potential can't disappoint you. It can't contradict your self-story. It doesn't reveal limits. Comfort prefers that version of you. The version who could, not the version who did. They noticed this pattern slowly. Not all at once. It appeared in small moments. moments that felt insignificant, like the pause before beginning, the pause that turned into delay, the delay that turned into routine, and eventually a routine that felt permanent. Comfort protects you from disappointment, not disappointment from others, from yourself. Because failing after trying hurts differently. It removes excuses. It forces honesty. Comfort avoids that reckoning. It keeps outcomes hypothetical. Hypotheticals don't demand self-redefinition. They let you believe the best about yourself without evidence. Comfort keeps you in that belief. But belief without action erodes quietly. There was an afternoon when this became clear. They were alone. No distractions pressing. The task sat nearby. Visible. Waiting. The familiar tension appeared. Not anxiety. Expectation. Expectation that effort would expose something. That they might not be as skilled, as focused, as capable as they imagined. Comfort intervened. Relief followed. Instant. That relief felt good. It always does. But relief is not peace. Relief ends discomfort. Peace strengthens capacity. Comfort specializes in relief. Comfort also protects you from grief. Because trying sometimes reveals loss. Loss of time. Loss of an old dream. Loss of a fantasy version of yourself. That grief is heavy. Comfort avoids it. It keeps doors half open indefinitely. But half-open doors lead nowhere. They remembered a time when they didn't negotiate so much. When effort felt natural. When mistakes didn't feel personal. Somewhere along the way, failure began to feel like identity. Comfort learned to protect against that. But protection became confinement. Comfort doesn't say you can't. It says you don't need to. That distinction matters. You don't need to sounds like wisdom. It sounds like maturity. Sometimes it is. But sometimes, it's avoidance disguised as self-respect. Self-respect isn't avoiding challenges. It's showing up honestly. Comfort confuses the two. It teaches you that ease equals wisdom. But wisdom often feels uncomfortable at first. Because it asks you to update your self-image. When comfort manages your exposure too well, growth stalls. Not dramatically. Incrementally. You don't stop believing. You stop practicing. And discipline fades without confrontation. This is where awareness changes the story. Not by demanding action. By revealing motive. Why are you choosing ease right now? Is it recovery? Or protection? Is it care? Or concealment? Only you know the answer. And noticing it is enough for now. Because once you see what comfort is protecting you from, it loses its invisibility. It no longer sounds like truth. It sounds like preference. This chapter isn't asking you to act yet. It's asking you to pause at the moment before comfort speaks. To notice what you're avoiding feeling. That feeling holds information. Information about identity. About fear. About trust. And that brings us to what comes next. Because every time you delay, something small but important shifts inside you. Not motivation. Not discipline. Trust. In the next chapter, we'll explore how comfort quietly reshapes your relationship with your own promises. This change is subtle, but it's where everything turns. Once you see what comfort protects you from, you begin to notice something else. Every delay leaves a trace. Not on your schedule, on your self-trust. In the next chapter, we'll explore how comfort slowly teaches you whether or not to believe yourself. This is where discipline truly begins. Let's continue. Chapter 3. The slow loss of self-trust. Self-trust doesn't disappear suddenly. It erodes. Quietly, gradually, without drama. Most people never notice it happening. Because nothing collapses. Life keeps moving. Responsibilities are handled. Days pass. From the outside, everything looks functional. But inside, something subtle is shifting. There was a time when their word to themselves meant something. Not because they were perfect, but because they believed in themselves. If they said they'd do something, they assumed they would try. Even if it was uncomfortable. Even if it was imperfect. That belief created momentum. Momentum created confidence. Confidence created action. It wasn't conscious. It was natural. Then comfort entered more often. Not all at once. In moments. Moments where effort felt optional. Moments where delay felt reasonable. And each time they delayed, nothing bad happened. No punishment. No immediate consequence. That's how trust begins to weaken. Not through pain, through absence of consequence. They didn't think, I'm breaking trust with myself. They thought, I'll do it later. Later felt harmless. Later I felt responsible. Later I felt kind. But later kept arriving, and leaving. There is a moment most people overlook. The moment after you decide not to act. Not the relief. The silence that follows. That silence holds information. It's the moment your mind notices the pattern. It doesn't speak loudly. It whispers. Maybe I won't follow through. That whisper is the beginning of doubt. Self-trust isn't confidence. It's predictable. It's knowing that when you tell yourself something matters, you'll behave accordingly. Not perfectly, but honestly. When predictability breaks, trust follows. They began making smaller promises. Not intentionally. Subconsciously. Instead of saying, I will, they said, I'll try. Instead of today, they said, soon. Those words felt safer. They left the room. Room to retreat. But the mind notices language. It tracks patterns. And over time, it learned something. Words didn't always lead to action. Plans didn't always lead to effort. Intention didn't always mean movement. They didn't feel lazy. They felt cautious. They didn't feel unmotivated. They felt unsure. That uncertainty wasn't about ability. It was about reliability. Self-trust doesn't collapse with one broken promise. It has many small ones. The ones no one else hears. The ones you whisper to yourself. I'll wake up earlier tomorrow. I'll start after the weekend. I'll get serious soon. Each time those promises dissolved, something adjusted internally. They started hesitating before committing. Not because they didn't want to commit. Because commitment felt risky. Risky to their self-image. Risky to their sense of control. If you don't fully commit, you don't fully fail. Comfort taught them that. But comfort never explained the cost. The cost was internal. A quiet disconnect. They stopped believing in their own urgency. They stopped responding to their own cues. When the thought appeared, now would be a good time, it carried less weight. Because experience had taught them something else. The mind keeps score. Not emotionally, statistically. It notices patterns. And it adjusts expectations. Over time, the expectation became this: you probably won't. That belief didn't shout. It softened effort. Why push hard if you don't trust the follow-through? Why start strong if history suggests a fade? This is how discipline disappears. Not through rebellion. Through broken predictability. Discipline requires trust. Trust that effort will be sustained. Trust that discomfort will be tolerated. Trust that intention will be honored. When that trust weakens, discipline becomes exhausting. They noticed something else. When someone else depended on them, they showed up. Deadlines were met. Responsibilities were honored. But when it came to themselves, the standard shifted. Not out of disrespect. Out of habit. Self-trust is built the same way trust with others is built. Through consistency. Through keeping small promises. Through predictability. When you don't keep showing up for yourself, your mind adjusts accordingly. It stops expecting reliability. That adjustment doesn't feel dramatic. It feels like low-grade doubt. Like hesitation. Like overthinking before starting. Because when you don't trust follow-through, starting feels heavier. Heavier than the task itself. They remembered a time when starting felt light. When action felt natural. That wasn't because life was easier. It was because self-trust was intact. They believed themselves then. And belief creates energy. Comfort interrupted that cycle. It taught them to delay. Delay taught them inconsistency. Inconsistency taught them doubt. Doubt weakened discipline. All without conflict. This chapter isn't about blame. It's about awareness. Because self-trust can be rebuilt. But only once it's recognized. You can't repair something you don't see. Self-trust isn't restored through motivation. It's restored through evidence. Small evidence. Repeated evidence. Kept promises. Even tiny ones. But before rebuilding comes honesty. You must see how trust was lost. Not through failure. Through accommodation. Comfort accommodated delay. Delay accommodated inconsistency. Inconsistency accommodated doubt. And doubt quietly replaced discipline. This is not a condemnation. It's an explanation. And explanations create relief. Because now the struggle makes sense. You're not broken. You're misaligned. And alignment begins with truth. The moment you recognize this pattern, something shifts. You stop asking, "Why can't I push myself?" And start asking, "Why don't I trust myself?" That question is powerful. Because it changes the solution. The solution is not intensity. It's reliable. This chapter ends with awareness, not action. Because action without trust becomes force. And force doesn't last. What lasts is restoration. and restoration begins gently. Once you see how self-trust erodes, another pattern becomes visible. The way rest begins to change. What once restored you starts replacing effort. In the next chapter, we'll explore the moment rest quietly becomes avoidance, and why it feels so convincing. This is where comfort deepens its hold. Let's continue. Chapter 4. When rest becomes avoidance. Rest is supposed to restore you. It's meant to give energy back, to sharpen focus, to make effort possible again. But there is a moment, quiet, almost invisible, when rest begins to change its role. It stops preparing you for effort and starts replacing it. That moment rarely feels wrong. That's why it lasts. They didn't think of themselves as avoiding anything. They thought they were being sensible. Life felt heavy enough already. Work required attention. People require energy. Days required presence. So rest felt earned, necessary, and sometimes it truly was. But necessity slowly turned into default. At first, rest had a clear purpose. It came after effort, after concentrating, after strain. It felt clean, like balance. Do the work, then rest. But somewhere along the way, the order shifted. Rest began arriving before effort. Not as recovery, as prevention. Prevention from discomfort. They would sit down with the intention to begin. Not forcefully, not dramatically. Just begin. But the body hesitated. A thought followed. Let me rest first. That sounded responsible. It sounded like listening to the body. So they rested. And after resting, starting felt even heavier. That's the part no one talks about. Avoidance increases sensitivity. The longer you avoid effort, the louder effort feels. Not because it's harder, because you're less practiced. Rest doesn't create energy by itself. It restores energy after it has been spent. When energy isn't spent, rest turns stagnant. It becomes sedation. Sedation feels calm. That's what makes it dangerous. It removes friction. It smooths edges. It lowers urgency. And urgency, while uncomfortable, is often the doorway to growth. They began organizing their life around comfort. Not intentionally. Gradually. Days were shaped to feel manageable. Not challenging. Not demanding. Just manageable. And manageability became the metric. Can I get through this without strain? That question replaced a different one. Is this moving me forward? Avoidance doesn't feel like running away. It feels like staying put. Like maintaining stability. But stability without direction becomes stagnation. You're not falling apart. You're not growing either. They noticed how rest had expanded. It occupied more space. Evenings blurred into distraction. Distraction blurred into routine. Routine blurred into identity. This is just how I unwind. But unwinding was no longer followed by rewinding. There was no return to effort. Only delay. Avoidance hides inside reasonable language. I'll do it when I'm clearer. I don't want to rush. I need to protect my energy. Those statements aren't lies. They're incomplete truths. Energy isn't protected by avoiding use. It's protected by intentional use. Clarity doesn't come before action. It comes from action. They waited for the feeling of readiness. It rarely came. Because readiness is not a feeling. It's a result of movement. The body learns through doing. The mind learns through evidence. Avoidance interrupts that learning. There was a particular night when this became undeniable. They had done very little that day. No strain. No pressure. Yet they felt exhausted. Not physically. Mentally. The exhaustion came from unspent intention. From holding energy instead of directing it. Unused energy turns inward. It becomes heavy. That's the paradox. Avoidance promises relief. But it creates fatigue. Effort feels heavy when you're unpracticed. But rest feels heavy when it replaces effort. The body needs both. Rest that follows effort feels clean. Rest that replaces effort feels dull. One restores. The other numbs. Avoidance is numbness disguised as care. It says, don't push. But it never asks, why are you avoiding it? They began noticing moments of self-negotiation. Small ones. I'll just relax a bit first. I'll check this quickly. I'll start after this. Each moment felt harmless. Together, they formed a pattern. Effort was always postponed. Rest was always immediate. That imbalance changed everything. Avoidance isn't laziness. It's sensitivity without structure. It's the nervous system choosing familiarity over challenge. And the nervous system learns quickly. It learns what leads to relief. It learns what leads to tension. Avoidance trains the nervous system to flinch at effort. Not because effort is harmful, because effort has become unfamiliar. This is why returning to discipline feels harder than starting fresh. Not because you've lost capacity. Because you've lost tolerance. Tolerance for friction. Tolerance for discomfort. Tolerance for not feeling ready. Avoidance lowers tolerance quietly. Until effort feels louder than it should. Then comfort steps in again. Offering rest. The cycle continues. Not out of weakness. Out of conditioning. They didn't need to push harder. They needed to see the pattern. To understand that rest had changed roles. That rest was no longer working. Effort was serving rest. That inversion was the problem. Rest is not the enemy. Avoidance is not the enemy. Unconscious substitution is. When rest substitutes growth, life shrinks quietly. Not dramatically. Comfortably. This chapter isn't asking you to stop resting. It's asking you to notice the sequence. Does rest follow effort? Or does it replace it? That question matters. Because sequence shapes discipline. Discipline doesn't begin with force. It begins with order. Effort first. Rest second. Not because rest must be earned, but because effort must be practiced. Practice rebuilds tolerance. Tolerance rebuilds trust. Trust rebuilds discipline. And discipline rebuilds self-respect. Avoidance interrupts that chain. But awareness restores it. Simply seeing the substitution loosens its grip. You no longer confuse rest with care. You begin to ask better questions. Am I restoring or avoiding it? That question changes behavior naturally, without pressure. Nothing needs to be fixed yet, only noticed. Because once you see avoidance clearly, it loses its camouflage. It stops feeling like wisdom. It starts feeling like hesitation. And hesitation can be met gently. This is the end of noticing. What comes next is rebuilding. Not through punishment. Through relationships. With effort. With rest. With yourself. Once you see how rest becomes avoidance, another question appears. How do you return to discipline without turning against yourself? In the next chapter, we'll explore how to rebuild discipline without punishment, pressure, or force. This is where gentleness becomes strength. Let's continue. Chapter 5. Discipline without punishment. Most people don't fail at discipline. They abandon it. Not because they're incapable. Because discipline has been taught as something harsh, rigid, unforgiving, punitive. Something you use against yourself when you're disappointed. That version of discipline doesn't last. It burns quickly and leaves resentment behind. They had tried discipline before. Many times. Each attempt followed the same pattern. A surge of motivation. A strict plan. High expectations. And then, life. Fatigue. Disruption. One missed day. That's when punishment arrived. Internal punishment. Harsh self-talk. All or nothing thinking. If I can't do it perfectly, why bother? That voice felt like accountability. But it wasn't. It was hostility. Punishment feels productive. It creates urgency. But urgency built on shame collapses under pressure. Because shame doesn't create consistency. It creates avoidance. And avoidance always looks for comfort. This is the cycle most people live in. Comfort, guilt, punishment, exhaustion, comfort. Discipline never gets a chance to mature. It's always forced or abandoned. Never cultivated. Real discipline doesn't feel like war. It feels like structure. Predictable. Steady. Quiet. It doesn't scream at you. It doesn't threaten you. It doesn't demand perfection. It simply asks you to return. Again. And again. And again. They didn't need more pressure. They needed a different relationship with effort. One not built on fear of failure, but on trust. Trust that effort wouldn't be punished. Trust that mistakes wouldn't erase progress. Trust that returning mattered more than intensity. Discipline without punishment begins with one shift. You stop asking, "How do I push myself?" and start asking, "How do I make this repeatable?" Repeatability is the foundation. Not difficult. Not willpower. Consistency. They chose something small. Not impressive. Not symbolic. Just doable. Something that didn't require motivation. Something that didn't threaten identity. Something that could be done even on tired days. The task felt almost too easy. That triggered doubt. Is this enough? Enough for what? Discipline isn't about proving worth. It's about building reliability. And reliability grows through repetition. Not strain. They did the small thing. Once. Nothing changed. No rush of confidence. No transformation. Just completion. The next day, they did it again. Still nothing dramatic. But something subtle happened. They didn't negotiate as much. The body recognized the pattern. Effort no longer felt unfamiliar. This is how discipline actually forms. Through familiarity. Not force. The nervous system learns safety in repetition, not in intensity. Punishment makes effort feel dangerous. Gentleness makes it accessible. They stopped speaking harshly to themselves, not because they were avoiding accountability, but because harshness had never worked. They noticed how often self-criticism followed missed days, and how that criticism delayed the return. So they removed it. When a day was missed, nothing dramatic happened. No internal lecture. No restart ritual. No shame. Just return. The next day. That single change altered everything. Because punishment trains fear. And fear trains avoidance. Removing punishment removed the fear. And without fear, return became possible. Discipline began to feel neutral. Not heavy. Not heroic. Just present. Something done quietly. Without emotional charge. This neutrality is misunderstood. People think discipline should feel intense. They mistake intensity for commitment. But intensity is unstable. Neutrality is sustainable. It doesn't depend on mood. It doesn't require excitement. It simply exists. They noticed something else. Self-trust began to return. Not because they felt confident. Because they felt predictable. They could expect themselves again. That expectation reduced friction. Starting felt lighter. Not because it was easier, because it was familiar. This is the paradox. Gentle discipline creates strong identity. Harsh discipline creates fragile identity. One builds quietly. The other burns out loudly. They stopped using discipline to punish past behavior. They used it to support future behavior. That shift matters. Because discipline aimed backward creates guilt. Discipline aimed forward creates momentum. Momentum doesn't need motivation. It feeds itself. Discipline without punishment also allows rest to return to its proper role. Rest followed effort again. It felt earned, not deserved. Earned doesn't mean moral. It means functional. The body rested better after doing something. Rest felt cleaner. Less dull. Less numbing. Because it was no longer hiding avoidance. It was restoring capacity. That changed evenings. And mornings. And the way days flowed. They didn't become rigid. They became steady. They didn't become intense. They became reliable. They didn't force growth. They allowed it. Discipline without punishment is not permissive. It still expects return. But return is not shamed. It's welcomed. That welcome is what keeps discipline alive. Not fear. This chapter isn't a method. It's a posture. A way of relating to effort. Effort as cooperation. Not conflict. Effort as practice. Not proof. Nothing in this chapter asks you to do more. It asks you to stop turning effort into a threat. Because when effort stops feeling dangerous, discipline becomes natural. Not easy, but possible. This is where rebuilding begins. Not loudly, not dramatically, quietly, through small returns, through consistency without cruelty, through discipline that doesn't hurt. When discipline becomes gentle, something else appears. Clarity. You begin to see yourself more honestly. Not through judgment, through reflection. In the next chapter, we'll face the mirror that discipline reveals and why avoiding it kept comfort in control. This is where self-understanding deepens. Let's continue. Chapter 6. The Mirror You Avoid. There is a moment discipline creates that most people never talk about. It's not motivation. It's not momentum. It's reflection. The moment you begin showing up consistently, even gently, you start seeing yourself clearly. And clarity can be uncomfortable. They didn't avoid discipline because it was hard. They avoided it because of what it revealed. Effort acts like a mirror. It shows you what you've been doing, what you've been avoiding, and what you've been telling yourself. Comfort blurred that mirror. Discipline wiped it clean. At first, the reflection felt subtle. Nothing dramatic. Just small realizations. How often they underestimated their time. How quickly they reached for distraction. How rarely they stayed present through discomfort. None of this felt damning. But it felt honest. Honesty has weight. Not because it accuses you, because it removes excuses. And without excuses, you're left with yourself. That's the mirror most people avoid. They noticed how quickly the urge to soften truth appeared. Well, anyone would struggle. I've had a lot going on. This isn't the right season. Those thoughts weren't lies. But they were shields. Shields against self-recognition. Against seeing patterns clearly. The mirror doesn't judge. It reveals. Judgment comes later from us. And many people mistake that discomfort for failure. It isn't. It's awareness catching up. As discipline continued gently, the reflection sharpened. They began noticing the gap between who they believed they were and how they actually behaved. Not in big ways. In small ones. The promises made lightly. The returns delayed unnecessarily. The moments of choice softened into comfort. None of it felt dramatic. That was the hardest part. The mirror doesn't show monsters. It shows habits. And habits are harder to blame. You can't point at a habit and say, "This isn't me." Habits are behavior repeated. They are you in motion. They realized something uncomfortable. They weren't lacking discipline. They were avoiding responsibility for their own patterns. Not responsibility as guilt. Responsibility as ownership. Ownership removes distance. The mirror also revealed something else. Not just weakness, capacity. They saw moments where effort was sustained. Moments where discomfort was tolerated. Moments where return happened without drama. Those moments contradicted an old belief. The belief that they were inconsistent by nature. The mirror corrected that story. That correction was unsettling. Because if inconsistency wasn't fixed, it was chosen. And choice brings agency. Agency brings responsibility. Comfort had removed that burden. The mirror returned it. Many people confuse self-awareness with self-criticism. They feel discomfort and assume they're doing something wrong. But discomfort here wasn't cruelty. It was alignment. The discomfort of seeing life clearly after a long period of blur. They noticed the temptation to look away, to distract, to explain, to justify. That temptation didn't mean failure. It meant the mirror was working. The mirror doesn't demand change immediately. It demands acknowledgement. Is this what I've been doing? That question alone shifts power. Because once behavior is acknowledged, it can't hide. Comfort loses invisibility. They realized why comfort felt safer. Comfort allowed them to remain undefined. Undefined selves don't need accountability. But defined selves do. The mirror defines. Not cruelly. Accurately. Seeing yourself accurately is destabilizing at first. It removes fantasy. It removes exaggeration. It replaces self-concept with evidence. Evidence isn't kind or unkind. It's neutral. This neutrality was new. They weren't being praised. They weren't being attacked. They were simply being seen. And being seen by yourself is one of the most intimate experiences there is. The mirror also revealed grief. Grief for time softened by comfort. Grief for opportunities delayed. Grief for a version of self that felt possible but untouched. That grief hurt quietly. But it was clean. It didn't accuse. It informed. Avoiding the mirror avoids grief. But it also avoids growth. Growth requires mourning illusions. Illusions about effort. Illusions about readiness. Illusions about who you thought you were. The mirror doesn't strip worth. It clarifies direction. It shows where energy leaks. Where choices repeat. Where discipline faded. And where it can return. They began sitting with the discomfort longer. Not forcing answers. Not correcting immediately. Just observing. That observation softened the mirror. It stopped feeling like exposure. It started feeling like orientation. Orientation matters. You can't move forward if you don't know where you are. Comfort obscured location. Discipline revealed it. This is why discipline without punishment is essential. Punishment makes the mirror hostile. Gentleness makes it usable. You can't learn from a mirror you fear. You can learn from one you trust. They noticed that clarity didn't demand speed. It invited steadiness. Not correction. Calibration. Small adjustments. Honest ones. The mirror didn't ask them to become someone else. It asked them to stop pretending. Pretending they were more tired than they were. Pretending they needed perfect conditions. Pretending delay was neutral. Seeing that felt grounding. This chapter isn't about fixing. It's about facing. Facing without flinching. Facing without punishment. Facing with curiosity. Curiosity keeps the mirror open. The mirror you avoid is the mirror that frees you. Not because it flatters. Because it clarifies. Clarity reduces internal conflict. Conflict drains energy. Energy returns when truth is accepted. This is the quiet turning point. Not when discipline becomes intense. When self-awareness becomes stable. From here, discomfort changes meaning. It stops being threatening. It starts being informative. Once discomfort informs instead of attacks, discomfort doesn't have to be an enemy. In the next chapter, we'll explore how to choose discomfort without turning it into punishment. This is where growth becomes calm. Let's continue. Chapter 7. Choosing discomfort without violence. Most people think discomfort is the enemy. Something to avoid. Something to push through. Something to conquer. That belief creates violence. Not physical violence, internal violence. The kind where you turn against yourself in the name of growth. That kind of growth never lasts. They had tried forcing themselves before. Deadlines, rules, harsh inner commands. It worked for a while. Then it collapsed. Because force doesn't build trust. It builds resistance. Discomfort itself wasn't the problem. The way they approached it was. They treated discomfort like a threat. Something to overpower. That made the body tense. The mind defensive. Effort felt like danger. Comfort felt like safety. But discomfort doesn't need to be violent. It doesn't need intensity. It doesn't need urgency. It needs consent. The moment you choose discomfort, instead of being dragged into it, everything changes. Choice removes panic. They noticed the difference one morning. There was something they didn't want to do. Not because it was impossible. Because it required presence. In the past, they would have forced it. Or avoided it. This time, they paused. Not to negotiate. To acknowledge. This will be uncomfortable. No judgment. No drama. Just truth. And that honesty softened the edge. Discomfort felt smaller once it was named. Because unnamed discomfort feels endless. Named discomfort feels contained. You know where it begins. You trust that it will end. Violence comes from surprise. Gentleness comes from awareness. They stopped trying to overpower resistance. They stopped asking, "How do I push myself?" And started asking, "What am I willing to tolerate today?" That question changed the scale. Willingness is different from force. Force ignores limits. Willingness respects them. But respect doesn't mean avoidance. It means calibrated exposure. Just enough discomfort to grow, not enough to fracture. This is where many people go wrong. They think growth must hurt intensely. But pain doesn't guarantee growth. Presence does. You can suffer intensely and still stay the same. You can experience mild discomfort and transform. They noticed that discomfort had layers. There was surface discomfort. The initial resistance. The heaviness before starting. And beneath that, a deeper discomfort. The discomfort of staying the same. That one lasted longer. Avoidance protects you from surface discomfort. But it traps you in deeper discomfort. The discomfort of stagnation. Of knowing something is unfinished. That discomfort doesn't announce itself loudly. It hums. Low and constant. That's the cost comfort never mentions. Choosing discomfort without violence means choosing the shorter discomfort. The discomfort that ends instead of the one that lingers. It means saying, "I will tolerate 10 minutes of effort to avoid years of quiet dissatisfaction." They practiced this gently. No dramatic commitments. No declarations. Just small, honest choices. I can do this for 5 minutes. 5 minutes didn't feel threatening. 5 minutes didn't activate panic. 5 minutes was tolerable. They didn't promise more. They didn't bargain. They just began. And once they began, something interesting happened. The discomfort peaked, then softened. Not because the task got easier. Because the body adjusted. The nervous system learned. This is safe. Safety changes everything. When discomfort feels safe, resistance weakens. When resistance weakens, discipline stabilizes. Not through fear. Through familiarity. Violence comes from urgency. Urgency says, fix this now or else. Gentle discomfort says, we can do this slowly. Slow doesn't mean ineffective. Slow means sustainable. Sustainability beats intensity every time. They stopped measuring progress by difficulty. They measured it by return. Did they come back tomorrow? That mattered more than how much they did today. Return builds identity. Intensity burns it. This approach changed how they spoke to themselves. No more threats. No more ultimatums. Just clear agreements. I will show up for this small window. And when the window closed, they stopped. No guilt. No pushing. That trust made the next return easier. Choosing discomfort without violence also reshaped rest. Rest no longer followed avoidance. It followed effort. That made rest feel clean again. Enjoyable. Restoration replaced numbness. They noticed how often people glorify suffering, as if pain itself were noble. But pain without awareness is just damage. Growth doesn't require damage. It requires attention. Attention keeps discomfort productive. There's a quiet confidence that comes from choosing discomfort intentionally. Not because you're tough. Because you're honest. Honesty builds self-respect. Self-respect builds courage. Courage doesn't shout. It steadies. They realized discomfort was never the threat. Unchosen discomfort was. Discomfort forced upon you creates trauma. Discomfort chosen by you creates strength. The difference is agency. Agency calms the nervous system. This chapter isn't asking you to suffer. It's asking you to stop anesthetizing growth. To let effort feel slightly uncomfortable. Not unbearable. Not overwhelming. Just real. Choosing discomfort without violence means staying kind while staying honest. It means saying, I won't abandon myself, and I won't lie to myself. That balance is rare. That balance is powerful. As this practice continued, something else changed. Time felt different. They stopped waiting for perfect moments. They acted within ordinary ones. That shift mattered. Because waiting feeds comfort. Acting feeds trust. This is where discipline becomes calm. Not rigid. Not aggressive. Just present. Discomfort stops being an obstacle. It becomes a signal. A signal that growth is near. And signals don't need to be feared. Choosing discomfort without violence is not a one-time decision. It's a practice. A daily calibration. How much discomfort can I tolerate without betraying myself? That answer changes day to day. And that's okay. This chapter isn't the climax. It's the foundation. Because once discomfort is chosen calmly, another pattern breaks. The dependence on motivation. And that's where we go next. Once discomfort becomes intentional, motivation loses its authority. In the next chapter, we'll explore why motivation keeps failing you and what replaces it when discipline becomes stable. This is where rhythm begins. Let's continue. Chapter 8. When motivation stops working. There comes a moment when motivation stops answering you. You wait for it. You look for it. You try to summon it. And nothing arrives. That moment is not failure. It's graduation. Most people build their lives on motivation. They wait until they feel ready. Until they feel inspired. Until the mood is right. And when motivation shows up, they move. When it disappears, they stop. That cycle feels normal. It's also why most change collapses. Motivation is emotional energy. And emotional energy is unstable. It responds to sleep, stress, praise, fear, hope. It rises. It falls. It cannot be the foundation of a steady life. It was never meant to be. They had lived this cycle for years. Bursts of energy, followed by silence. Strong beginnings, quiet endings. They thought the problem was discipline. It wasn't. The problem was dependence. Motivation trained them to associate action with feeling. If it felt good, they acted. If it felt heavy, they waited. Waiting felt responsible. I'll do it when I'm ready. But readiness never arrived consistently. Because readiness is emotional. And emotions are weather. You don't build shelter out of weather. When motivation stopped working, they panicked at first. The familiar rush was gone. No excitement. No urgency. Just a quiet awareness that something still needed to be done. That awareness didn't push. It waited. This is where many people collapse. They assume the absence of motivation means the absence of capacity. It doesn't. It means the body is asking for a different operating system. Motivation speaks loudly. It shouts encouragement. It promises transformation. It exaggerates reward. Discipline speaks softly. It doesn't promise anything. It just asks for presence. They noticed that without motivation, the task felt neutral. Not exciting. Not terrifying. Just there. That neutrality was unfamiliar. They had always relied on emotion to move. Now emotion was quiet. What remained was choice. Choice is less dramatic than motivation. It doesn't thrill. But it doesn't disappear either. Choice waits patiently. Every morning. Every moment. They began acting without enthusiasm. That felt wrong at first. They thought action required desire. It didn't. It required agreement. I said I would do this. That sentence replaced motivation. Not shouted. Not emotional. Just stated. This shift was uncomfortable. Because motivation makes effort feel justified. Without it, effort feels exposed. You're left with the truth. I'm doing this because I chose to. No adrenaline to hide behind. That honesty was sobering. It removed fantasy. No more imagining future versions. Just current behavior. That's when identity began forming. Identity doesn't come from motivation. It comes from repetition without drama. From showing up when no one is watching, including yourself. Especially yourself. They realized something quietly powerful. Motivation had made them dependent. Discipline was making them free. Free from waiting. Free from mood. Free from emotional negotiation. They stopped asking, "Do I feel like it?" and started asking, "What did I agree to?" Agreements outlast emotions. They don't fluctuate. They clarify. This didn't mean forcing action. It meant reducing friction. They made choices smaller. Less dramatic. No heroic effort. Just consistent return. Motivation loves big gestures. Discipline prefers small ones. Motivation says, "Change your life." Discipline says, "Do this next thing." The next thing is always manageable. Life changes quietly. They noticed motivation still visited sometimes, but they no longer depended on it. When it came, it was welcome. When it left, nothing collapsed. That stability was new. Stability doesn't feel exciting. It feels grounded. And grounded effort compounds. Emotion-based effort resets. This chapter matters because most people quit here. When motivation fades, they interpret silence as a sign. They say, "Maybe this isn't for me." But silence isn't rejection. It's space. Space for ownership. Ownership doesn't need encouragement. It needs commitment. Not dramatic commitment. Practical commitment. "I will return tomorrow." That sentence builds more than motivation ever could. They began trusting quiet effort. Trust grew slowly, but it grew deeply. Self-trust is not built in excitement. It's built in follow-through. Even minimal follow-through counts. This is the moment discipline stops feeling like control and starts feeling like reliability. Reliability creates safety. Safety creates freedom. Freedom doesn't come from endless choice. It comes from fewer negotiations, less inner debate, clear defaults. They understood now why motivation always felt necessary. It gave them permission. Permission to act. Permission to stop. Permission to explain inconsistency. Motivation softened responsibility. When motivation was present, effort felt justified. When it was absent, inaction felt excusable. Either way, motivation stayed in control. That control was subtle. They realized something uncomfortable. Motivation had never made them disciplined. It had only made them temporarily active. Activity isn't commitment. Commitment doesn't require emotion. It requires agreement. An agreement you keep, even when the feeling changes. Especially when the feeling changes. Without motivation, they expected resistance. But what they met instead was neutrality. The task didn't fight them. It simply waited. Waiting felt strange. There was no rush, no pressure. Just the quiet truth. This still needs to be done. That truth didn't shout. It didn't beg. It didn't threaten. It respected their agency. For the first time, action wasn't emotional. It was intentional. They acted because they chose to, not because they felt inspired. This stripped away fantasy. No future self to hide behind. No surge of excitement to mask effort. Just behavior. Behavior became grounding. Not impressive. Not dramatic. Reliable. They noticed something else. Without motivation, there was less inner noise. No bargaining. No pep talks. The mind felt quieter. Motivation had always stirred emotion. Emotion stirred debate. Debate delayed action. Silence shortened the distance between decision and movement. This was unfamiliar territory. Most of their life had been lived emotionally. Up when inspired. Down when tired. Now effort sat in the middle. Neutral effort didn't exhaust them. It didn't inflate expectations. It didn't demand reward. It simply accumulated. Accumulation builds identity. Not the identity you talk about. The one you trust. They stopped asking, "Why don't I feel motivated?" and started asking, "What did I decide?" Decision simplified everything. No mood tracking. No emotional checking. This didn't make life rigid. It made it lighter. Less self-monitoring. Less disappointment. Motivation used to inflate expectations. I'll do everything today. Discipline lowered them. I'll return today. Return became the metric. Not intensity. Not speed. Return. They began trusting themselves again. Not because they felt confident. Because they were predictable. Predictability builds self-respect. Self-respect doesn't come from hype. It comes from consistency without negotiation. Without applause. Without drama. They understood now. Motivation is not bad. It's just unreliable. A visitor. Discipline is what stays. When motivation leaves. It's what carries you through ordinary days. And ordinary days make up a life. This wasn't exciting. But it was stabilizing. And stability created space. Space for clarity. With motivation out of the way, another truth surfaced. The real challenge wasn't starting. It was continuing, without burning out. Once motivation is no longer the engine, a new question appears. How do you build a rhythm that doesn't exhaust you and doesn't collapse? In the next chapter, we'll explore how discipline becomes sustainable. This is where effort learns to breathe. Let's continue. Chapter 9. The Rhythm That Lasts. When motivation leaves, and discipline stays, another problem quietly appears. Exhaustion. Not the dramatic kind. Not collapse. Not burnout you can point to. The slow kind. The kind that creeps in when effort has no rhythm. They noticed it after a few weeks. They were showing up. Returning. Keeping agreements. But something felt strained. Not painful. Tight. They weren't overwhelmed. They were unsustainable. This was unfamiliar territory. They had learned how to start without motivation. But they hadn't learned how to pace themselves. Most people think burnout comes from doing too much. It doesn't. It comes from doing things without recovery, without rhythm. A machine can run continuously. A human can't. Discipline without rhythm becomes quiet self-erasure. You keep going, but something inside you thins. They realized they had replaced one imbalance with another. Before, motivation caused spikes and crashes. Now, discipline created a flat line. No crashes, but no breathing either. Life doesn't move in straight lines. It moves in waves. Ignoring that doesn't make you strong. It makes you brittle. They began observing natural rhythms. Not schedules. Patterns. Energy rising in the morning, dipping in the afternoon, softening at night. Discipline that fights biology always loses. Discipline that listens lasts. They stopped asking, "How much can I push today?" and started asking, "How do I want to return tomorrow?" That question changed everything. Return became sacred, not performance. They realized something important. If today's effort makes tomorrow harder, today's effort was miscalibrated. Sustainable discipline leaves room. Room to breathe. Room to adapt. Room to recover. Recovery isn't rest alone. It's variation. They noticed how monotonous effort drained them. Same intensity. Same expectation. Same internal tone. That sameness flattened joy. Flattened curiosity. Rhythm reintroduces contrast. Some days lighter. Some days deeper. Not because of mood. Because of design. They began assigning different weights to days. Not rigidly. Intuitively. Today is a maintenance day. Tomorrow can stretch. Maintenance days mattered. They preserved energy. They reinforced identity. They prevented resentment. Resentment is a warning sign. Not against the task. Against the way you're approaching it. Ignoring resentment leads to collapse. They learned to listen before resentment hardened. They adjusted early. Less intensity. Same return. That balance felt new. This is where most people fail. They equate rhythm with weakness. They think easing off means slipping. It doesn't. Slipping comes from rigidity. Rigidity breaks under pressure. Rhythm bends. Bending preserves structure. They stopped romanticizing grind. Grind ignores cycles. Cycles are real. You can't argue with them. Every sustainable system has pulse. Work. Rest. Work again. The absence of pulse is not discipline. It's numbness. They noticed how guilt disrupted rhythm. Guilt erased rest. Rest erased guilt. That loop was destructive. They replaced guilt with permission. Not permission to quit. Permission to regulate. Regulation keeps the system alive. They learned to stop before exhaustion. Not after. Stopping early felt counterintuitive. But it preserved momentum. Momentum doesn't require intensity. It requires continuity. Continuity requires care. Care is not indulgence. Care is maintenance. You maintain what you value. They began valuing themselves as part of the system, not something to be overridden. This changed their relationship with effort. Effort no longer felt adversarial. It felt collaborative. A conversation, not a command. They also noticed how rhythm softened anxiety. Anxiety thrives on unpredictability. Rhythm creates expectation. Expectation calms the nervous system. Calm made effort cleaner. Less resistance. Less delay. Not because it was easier. Because it was familiar. They stopped thinking in streaks. Streaks create pressure. Pressure invites collapse. They thought in returns. Missed days no longer meant failure. They meant recalibration. Recalibration preserved trust. Trust kept them coming back. This is the discipline no one posts about. It's quiet, unimpressive, but it compounds. They noticed how rhythm changed their identity. They stopped seeing themselves as someone trying. They saw themselves as someone living this way. That shift mattered. Identity stabilizes behavior. Behavior stabilizes identity. Rhythm connects the two. Without rhythm, they fight each other. This chapter isn't about balance. Balance implies equal weight. Life isn't equal. It's seasonal. Some seasons push. Some preserve. Both are necessary. Confusing one for the other causes burnout. They began asking better questions. What does this season require? Not, how much can I endure? Endurance has limits. Rhythm respects limits without obeying fear. It's disciplined compassion. Firm but humane. That combination lasts. They finally understood why they'd burned out before. They confused intensity with commitment. Commitment is quieter. It shows up tomorrow. The rhythm that lasts doesn't announce itself. It doesn't impress others. It carries you, day after day. And once rhythm is established, another shift begins. Effort stops feeling central. Life starts expanding again. That's where we go next. When discipline becomes rhythmic, it stops consuming your life. In the next chapter, we'll explore what happens when effort creates space instead of pressure. This is where discipline becomes freedom. Let's continue. Chapter 10. When discipline becomes freedom. For a long time, they believed discipline would take something from them. Time, ease, joy. They believed a disciplined life would feel narrow, controlled, restricted. That belief kept them circling comfort. It felt safer to stay loose than to feel trapped. But something unexpected happened once rhythm settled in. Discipline stopped asking for more. It started giving back. Space appeared. Not empty space. Usable space. The kind you notice when your mind isn't constantly negotiating. The kind that opens when effort no longer feels like a fight. They realized something quietly important. Discipline had never been the cage. Indecision was. Comfort had disguised it as freedom. Every day before, they had lived inside choice overload. Should I start now or later? Should I rest or push? Should I care or ignore it? Those questions drained more energy than the work itself. Decision fatigue was the real exhaustion. Now, many of those questions were gone. Not because life became rigid. Because defaults were set. Defaults are quiet liberators. When you know how you usually respond, you stop debating. You act. Action removes mental clutter. Clutter suffocates freedom. Freedom doesn't come from unlimited options. It comes from fewer, clearer ones. Discipline clarified. Clarity freed. They noticed mornings felt lighter. Not because they were easy. Because they were predictable. Predictability removed anxiety. Anxiety thrives on uncertainty. Rhythm starves it. That calm energy changed how days unfolded. Less rushing. Less reacting. They had time again. Not because the day was longer. Because their attention wasn't scattered. Attention creates time. Before, comfort stole hours quietly. Scrolling. Avoiding. Delaying. Now, effort took less time because it wasn't postponed. Starting earlier ends sooner. This is the paradox most people miss. Discipline doesn't make life smaller. It makes it efficient. Efficiency creates margin. Margin is freedom. The freedom to rest without guilt. The freedom to enjoy without numbing. The freedom to say no without fear. They noticed rest felt different now. Before, rest was escape. Now, it was restoration. There's a difference. Escape avoids responsibility. Rest honors it. Rest after effort feels clean. Rest after avoidance feels heavy. That heaviness was gone. Because effort was no longer hanging unfinished. Unfinished things occupy mental space. Finished things release it. Discipline finished conversations with themselves. No more I should. No more background guilt. Silence replaced pressure. Silence is misunderstood. People fear it because it reveals truth. But when discipline is steady, silence feels safe. Nothing is chasing you. They also noticed confidence changed shape. It wasn't loud. It wasn't performative. It was embodied. Embodied confidence doesn't need reassurance. It comes from knowing you will do what you said you would do. Even when no one is watching. Especially then. That reliability unlocked something deeper. Trust. Not trust in outcomes. Trust in self. Self-trust is freedom. Because when you trust yourself, you don't need constant control. You don't need rigid rules. You don't need punishment. Control tries to force behavior. Trust allows it. Allowance reduces resistance. Resistance drains energy. This is why discipline done right feels freeing. It removes internal opposition. You're no longer fighting yourself. You're moving with yourself. They realized how much life they had spent arguing internally. Every task a debate. Every rest a negotiation. That war was over. Discipline ended the war not by winning, but by making it unnecessary. Agreements replaced arguments. Life expanded into the quiet spaces. Creativity returned. Curiosity returned. Joy returned, not loud joy. Subtle joy. The kind that shows up when your mind isn't exhausted. When your energy isn't leaking. When your days feel honest. They didn't feel like a different person. They felt like a clearer one. Less fog. More presence. Presence is freedom. Not the freedom to do anything. The freedom to do what matters without resistance. That's rare. They also noticed fear softened. Not disappeared. Softened. Fear thrives in chaos. When life feels orderly, fear loses leverage. It no longer controls behavior. It becomes information. Information can be used. This didn't make them fearless. It made them steady. Steadiness outlasts courage. Courage spikes. Steadiness carries. Day after day. That's freedom in motion. They understood now why comfort was tempting. Comfort promised relief. Discipline delivered it, but delayed. Delayed relief lasts longer. Immediate relief fades quickly. Lasting relief settles. Settled relief feels like peace. Peace is freedom. This chapter isn't saying discipline fixes life. Life still changes. Loss still happens. Uncertainty remains. But discipline gives you ground. Ground doesn't remove storms. It lets you stand in them, without being swept away. Standing without panic is freedom. Not because nothing hurts. Because nothing controls you. They realized the deepest shift wasn't productivity. It was dignity. Living with dignity feels spacious. You're not scrambling. You're not apologizing for your existence. You're not bargaining with your future. You're inhabiting your life. Fully. Discipline didn't trap them. It returned them to themselves. And that return changed everything. But this wasn't the end. Freedom introduces a new responsibility. Choice. Real choice. In the next chapter, we'll explore what happens when discipline creates freedom, and how not to lose it. Because freedom, without awareness, can quietly slide back into comfort. When life feels free again, comfort returns with a new face. In the next chapter, we'll examine how to recognize it before it quietly takes control again. This is where awareness protects freedom. Let's continue. Chapter 11. When comfort returns in disguise. Freedom doesn't announce itself when it leaves. It fades quietly. That's what surprised them most. They thought losing discipline would feel dramatic. A collapse. A failure. A clear moment of "I messed up." It wasn't like that. Freedom didn't disappear. It softened. Edges blurred. Choices became casual. They were still disciplined. Still returning. Still showing up. But something subtle had shifted. Awareness had loosened. This is how comfort returns. Not as laziness. As permission. Permission that sounds reasonable. You've been consistent. You've earned ease. You don't need to be so strict. None of those thoughts were wrong. That's what made them dangerous. Comfort doesn't lie outright. It reframes. It takes truth and removes its edges. It smooths discipline into softness. They noticed the pauses lengthen. Not skipping days. Just starting later. Not avoiding effort. Just reducing intention. No alarms went off. No guilt appeared. Everything still looked balanced. That's how comfort wins. Comfort doesn't demand collapse. It negotiates dilution. A little less presence. A little less honesty. Nothing noticeable at first. They had seen this before. But only in hindsight. This time, awareness caught it early. That awareness mattered. Freedom without awareness drifts. Not backward. Sideways. Into ease that slowly erodes edge. Edge isn't aggression. It's clarity. The clarity to notice when effort becomes optional. Optional effort rarely survives pressure. They realized something uncomfortable. Discipline had given them freedom. Now freedom was tempting them to relax discipline. This is the cycle no one warns you about. Most people think the danger is before discipline. It isn't. The real danger comes after. When life feels lighter. When things are working, you stop paying attention. Attention keeps systems alive. Inattention lets them decay. Not dramatically. Silently. That silence is the disguise. They ask themselves a hard question. What am I assuming will take care of itself? That question revealed everything. Assumptions are comfort's favorite hiding place. They noticed how freedom made effort feel optional again. Optional feels good. But optional dissolves identity. You stop being someone who does this. You become someone who sometimes does. Sometimes is fragile. This wasn't about punishment. It wasn't about tightening rules. It was about restoring awareness. Awareness is the guardrail. They didn't want rigidity. They wanted clarity. Clarity keeps freedom from drifting. It doesn't suffocate it. They revisited their agreements. Not to add more. To remember why they existed. Agreements without meaning become chores. They reminded themselves. Discipline wasn't built to restrict. It was built to protect. Protect energy. Protect clarity. Comfort doesn't attack protection directly. It erodes necessity. You don't really need this anymore. That sentence has ended more progress than failure ever has. They saw how easily discipline can become performative. Maintained just enough to feel responsible. But not enough to stay sharp. Sharpness isn't cruelty. It's attentiveness. The ability to notice when you're drifting. They noticed how often people confuse peace with passivity. Peace is active. It requires upkeep. Passivity hands control back to habit. Habits don't care about your growth. They care about repetition. Repetition without awareness becomes stagnation. Stagnation feels comfortable, at first. They realized the question wasn't how do I stay disciplined? It was how do I stay awake? Awake to subtle shifts. Awake to softened edges. Awake to the stories comfort tells when life feels calm. They didn't panic. They adjusted. Small recalibration. Restoring intention without force. They returned to one question daily. Am I choosing this, or defaulting to ease? That question didn't accuse. It clarified. Clarity restored strength. Not aggressive strength. Quiet strength. The kind that doesn't need drama to stay present. They realized comfort isn't evil. It's neutral. But unchecked comfort becomes control. Control without awareness feels like freedom. This chapter matters because most people relapse here. Not into chaos. Into softness that slowly dulls them. They think they're fine. Until momentum disappears. Until edge is gone. Until discipline feels optional again. Then the cycle restarts. Awareness breaks the cycle. Not intensity. Not fear. Awareness. They understood now. Freedom must be tended. Like fire. Too tight and it suffocates. Too loose and it fades. Attention keeps it alive. This wasn't about being strict forever. It was about staying honest. Honesty reveals drift early. Early correction is gentle. Late correction is violent. They preferred gentle. This chapter doesn't warn you against comfort. It teaches you to see it clearly. Clarity neutralizes power. What you can see clearly can't control you quietly. And once awareness is restored, another shift becomes possible. Freedom stops being fragile. It becomes embodied. Lived, not managed. Once you can recognize comfort in disguise, you stop fearing it. In the next chapter, we'll explore how to live freely without slipping back into unconscious ease. This is where freedom becomes natural. Let's continue. Chapter 12. When freedom becomes natural. There is a moment when discipline disappears. Not because it failed. Because it finished its work. They didn't notice it at first. Nothing dramatic happened. No celebration. No sense of arrival. Just a quiet shift. They stopped thinking about discipline. Not because they stopped practicing it. Because it no longer required attention. It had moved beneath the surface. This is the stage most people never reach. They think discipline is something you do. But at its highest level, discipline is something you are. Not an effort. An orientation. A default way of moving through the day. Earlier, discipline felt like management. Rules. Checks. Awareness. Necessary at the time. But management is temporary. Eventually, something deeper replaces it. Embodiment. Embodiment means you no longer negotiate. You no longer convince yourself. You no longer try. You simply act in alignment. This didn't make life rigid. It made it fluid. Because alignment removes friction. Friction is what makes discipline feel heavy. They noticed decisions felt simpler. Not because options disappeared. Because relevance became obvious. What mattered stood out. They didn't ask, "Should I do this?" They asked, "Does this belong?" That question is quieter. And more powerful. Belonging filters choice. You don't have to resist what doesn't belong. It simply falls away. That's freedom without effort. They realized something important. Freedom isn't doing whatever you want. It's not wanting what pulls you away from yourself. That shift changed everything. Earlier, freedom had required vigilance. Awareness. Checking. Correction. Now, it required presence. Presence replaces monitoring. Monitoring implies danger. Presence implies trust. Trust in self. Trust built over time. They trusted themselves now. Not blindly. Through evidence. They had seen themselves return. Return built reliability. Reliability built identity. Identity stabilized behavior. This loop was complete. They didn't feel perfect. They felt grounded. Grounded people don't drift easily. They can rest without disappearing. This is the difference between ease and unconscious comfort. Ease is present. Comfort is numbing. They could feel the difference now. Ease feels alive. Comfort feels dull. Dullness isn't peace. It's disconnection. They no longer chased stimulation. They didn't need to. Life felt sufficient. Not exciting every moment, but honest. Honesty is underrated. Honesty keeps you awake. Awake people don't need constant discipline. They noticed how silence changed. Earlier, silence was something to endure. Now, it was something to inhabit. Silence felt rich. When your mind isn't fighting itself, quiet becomes nourishing. This is where peace lives. Peace isn't passive. It's attentive without tension. It's openness without drift. That balance is rare. They also noticed fear had less influence. Not gone, but reduced. Fear couldn't manipulate behavior anymore. Fear needs confusion. Clarity starves it. Clarity had become natural, not forced. They didn't protect freedom aggressively. They lived it honestly. Honesty keeps freedom intact. You don't lose what you inhabit. They understood now why discipline felt temporary. It was scaffolding, built to be removed. You don't live on scaffolding. You live in the structure it supports. This was the structure. Life felt simpler. Not smaller. Simpler. Less noise. Noise had always been the enemy. Not effort. Not discomfort. Noise. They weren't always calm. They weren't always certain. But they were always present. Presence outlasts certainty. This presence changed relationships. They listened more. Reacted less. They didn't need to prove alignment. They lived it. People felt it. Without explanation. Embodied discipline is silent. They also noticed setbacks felt different. Not threatening. Informative. Information doesn't shame. They adjusted naturally. No spiral. No collapse. Just recalibration. This is the end of management. And the beginning of maintenance. Maintenance is lighter. Less effort. They understood something quietly profound. The goal was never discipline. It was congruence. Life matching values. When life matches values, discipline dissolves into behavior. Behavior feels free. Freedom became boring to outsiders. No drama. No extremes. But deeply satisfying. Satisfaction doesn't shout. It settles. Settled people don't chase. They choose. Choosing from clarity feels effortless. Not because it's easy. Because it's aligned. Alignment removes resistance. This chapter matters because it shows the destination. Not perfection. Not constant vigilance. Natural integrity. Integrity doesn't need reminders. It's lived. It's felt. It's quiet. And once freedom is lived naturally, another question emerges. What do you build with it? When freedom becomes natural, life opens again. In the next chapter, we'll explore how to direct that freedom without losing yourself to new distractions. This is where purpose returns. Let's continue. Chapter 13. What you do with freedom. Freedom is not the end of the journey. It's the beginning of responsibility. For a long time, freedom was the goal. Freedom from chaos. Freedom from inner conflict. Freedom from constant negotiation. Now that freedom felt natural, a new question appeared. What is this for? They noticed something unexpected. Without pressure, days felt open. Not empty. Open. Open space can feel unsettling. When life was crowded with struggle, direction was obvious. Survive. Fix. Endure. Now those commands were gone. They realized many people return to chaos here. Not because they want pain. Because pain gives direction. Comfort gives distraction. Freedom without intention invites noise. New goals. New habits. New pursuits. Not chosen deeply. Just available. They understood this was a dangerous moment. Not dramatic danger. Subtle danger. The danger of filling space unconsciously. They paused. Not out of fear. Out of respect. Freedom deserved thought. They asked a quieter question. What deserves my energy now? Not what excites me. Not what impresses. Energy is finite. Freedom gives you control over it. Control without intention wastes it. Intention gives freedom direction. They noticed how easy it would be to drift. To say yes to everything. To become busy again. Busyness feels productive. But busyness without meaning recreates exhaustion. Not physical exhaustion. Existential exhaustion. The kind that leaves you restless. They remembered why discipline mattered. Not to optimize life. To clarify it. Clarity was still the compass. They stopped looking for big answers. No grand purpose. No singular calling. Those ideas felt heavy. Instead, they looked for resonance. What felt quietly right? What held attention without force? What mattered even when no one noticed? Resonance is softer than ambition, but more durable. Ambition burns fast. Resonance sustains. They noticed resonance didn't rush. It waited. It asked to be met, not chased. This felt different from old drives. Old drives were fueled by lack. Prove. Fix. Escape. This one wasn't. It came from sufficiency. When you're no longer trying to escape yourself, your motivations change. They become cleaner. They also noticed something else. Freedom didn't demand productivity. It invited contribution. Contribution is different. Productivity measures output. Contribution measures impact. Impact doesn't require volume. It requires presence. They stopped asking, "How much can I do?" and started asking, "What difference does this make?" That question filtered everything. Many options disappeared quietly. Not rejected. Outgrown. What didn't align lost appeal. They noticed how peace sharpened discernment. When your mind is calm, irrelevance is obvious. Noise stands out. So does meaning. They didn't rush to define purpose. They lived attentively. Purpose revealed itself through consistency, not revelation. Consistency shows you what you return to naturally. Return reveals what matters. Not what you say matters. What you choose when free. This was a humbling realization. Freedom exposed preferences honestly. No pressure to perform. No fear to distort choice. They saw how earlier goals were survival-based. Now goals felt stewardship-based. What do I protect? What do I build slowly? Building slowly felt right. No urgency. No countdown. Just steady intention. They learned something subtle. When you build from freedom, you don't need validation. The work itself satisfies. Satisfaction replaced applause. This changed how they related to success. Success wasn't accumulation. It was coherence. Life making sense internally. Coherence is rare. Most lives are fragmented. Work here. Values there. Freedom allowed alignment. They noticed how coherence felt. Calm. Stable. Not thrilling. But deeply grounding. They weren't chasing happiness. They were cultivating meaning. Meaning lasts longer. Happiness visits. They also recognized a new temptation. To overcommit again. Freedom makes generosity tempting. But generosity without boundaries drains. They stayed selective. Not closed. Intentional. Freedom doesn't mean openness to everything. It means choosing deliberately. Choice is the responsibility of freedom. Avoiding choice recreates comfort. Comfort returns when choice is abandoned. They understood now why discipline mattered earlier. It taught them how to choose. Now choice needed wisdom, not effort. This chapter matters because many people waste freedom. They fill it with distractions. They confuse options with opportunity. Opportunity requires discernment. They practiced saying no. Not out of fear. Out of clarity. Clarity protects depth. Depth mattered more now. Depth builds legacy. Not public legacy. Internal legacy. The legacy of how a life feels. Not how it looks. That distinction changed everything. They realized life didn't need to be extraordinary. It needed to be intentional. Intentional living feels complete. Even when simple. Freedom had matured into stewardship. Stewardship of time. Stewardship of energy. Stewardship of attention. Attention directs life. They didn't rush to define the future. They stayed present. Presence keeps freedom clean. Clean freedom doesn't corrode. They finally understood the arc. Discipline gave freedom. Freedom demanded purpose. Purpose didn't shout. It whispered. And they listened. This chapter doesn't give you answers. It gives you a posture. A way to stand inside freedom. Without drifting. And from that posture, the final transformation begins. Not about doing. About leaving something behind. When freedom finds direction, it naturally turns outward. In the next chapter, we'll explore what it means to live in a way that outlasts you. This is where meaning becomes legacy. Let's continue. Chapter 14. The Life That Continues After You. There comes a point when growth stops being personal. Not because you've finished growing. Because growth turns outward. For a long time, the work was internal. Stabilize. Clarify. Return. You needed yourself to survive. That season mattered. But now, survival is no longer the focus. Presence is. And presence has reach. It moves beyond you. They noticed it quietly at first. The way people slowed down around them. The way conversations softened. The way silence felt safer in their presence. They hadn't tried to teach anything. They hadn't offered advice. They simply lived differently. That difference lingered. Legacy doesn't begin with intention. It begins with consistency. The consistency of tone, of presence. Most people think legacy is something you leave behind. Something written. Something named. But the deepest legacy is something you leave within others. A felt experience. They realized people didn't remember what was said. They remembered how they felt afterward. Calmer. Clearer. Less rushed. That realization changed everything. Legacy wasn't performance. It was atmosphere. And atmosphere is created moment by moment. They began paying attention to their impact. Not with anxiety. With care. Care changes tone. Tone travels. You carry it into rooms. Into relationships. Into moments you don't control. This wasn't about responsibility in a heavy sense. It was about stewardship. Stewardship of how you show up. Of how you listen. Listening became the most powerful act. Not fixing. Not correcting. Listening without needing to respond. People open around presence. They don't open around force. Force demands. Presence invites. They noticed how often people were unseen. Not unheard. Unseen. Presence restores visibility. This is how a life begins to extend beyond itself. Not by achievement. By availability. Being fully there. They also noticed something sobering. Presence requires restraint. You can't be present if you're always reacting. Reaction centers you. Presence centers others without losing yourself. That balance took years to learn. It was built on discipline. On rhythm. This is why earlier chapters mattered. You can't offer calm you don't possess. You can't extend clarity you haven't built. Legacy depends on inner order. They understood now why their old self couldn't sustain this. They were too busy surviving. Too busy managing themselves. Now there was space. Space creates generosity. Not the dramatic kind. The steady kind. The kind that doesn't need recognition. They noticed they were more patient. Not because they tried. Because urgency was gone. Urgency narrows attention. Without urgency, moments expanded. People felt met. That feeling stayed. Long after conversations ended. They realized legacy isn't built later. It's built now. In how you respond to interruption. In how you handle silence. Every moment carries weight. Not pressure. Meaning. Meaning deepens experience. They also understood legacy isn't about being remembered. It's about leaving things better. Not grandly. Incrementally. They stopped trying to impress. Impressing fades. Stability endures. People trust what endures. Trust is the quiet currency of legacy. Trust builds safety. Safety allows growth. Growth spreads. They noticed how their calm gave others permission. Permission to slow down. Permission to think clearly. Permission to not perform. This permission mattered. The world is loud. Loudness compresses people. Calm expands them. They realized the most radical thing you can do is be steady. Steadiness resists chaos without confrontation. It doesn't argue. It demonstrates. This chapter isn't asking you to become important. It's asking you to become reliable. Reliable presence changes lives quietly, including your own. They noticed that legacy also meant restraint. Knowing when not to speak. When not to intervene. Silence, used well, teaches. Teaching without words is rare. But it lasts longer. Because it's felt. Not memorized. They stopped measuring impact. Impact isn't always visible. Seeds grow underground. Legacy works the same way. They understood they wouldn't see everything they influenced. That was okay. Control isn't part of legacy. Trust is. They trusted the process. They trusted presence. They trusted time. Time carries meaning forward. This chapter marks a shift. From building yourself to contributing without depletion. Contribution without sacrifice. Sacrifice drains. Contribution nourishes. You give what you have stabilized, not what you're missing. This is maturity, not age. Integration. When inner and outer lives align. They felt less need to explain themselves. Explanations are for uncertainty. Presence speaks clearly. It doesn't justify. They realized the paradox. The more complete they felt, the less they needed recognition. Recognition no longer defined worth. Worth had settled internally. Settled worth is generous. Unsettled worth competes. Competition erodes legacy. This chapter isn't dramatic. Legacy rarely is. It's slow. Accumulative. They weren't building monuments. They were building moments. Moments accumulate into memory. Memory shapes lives. This is what remains when noise fades. Not accomplishments. Not status. But how people felt becoming themselves around you. They understood now. A disciplined life becomes a generous life. Not by trying. By being. And when a life reaches this stage, one final realization waits. Legacy isn't about what continues after you leave. It's about how you leave each moment. When a life learns how to continue beyond itself, there is nothing left to prove. In the final chapter, we'll return to the beginning and close the loop. Not with an ending. With a quiet truth you carry forward. Chapter 15. Nothing left to prove. There is a moment when the work becomes quiet. Not because it is finished, but because it no longer needs to announce itself. For a long time, life felt like a series of thresholds. Before and after. Then and now. You measured yourself by movement. By change. You were always becoming. Always fixing. Always adjusting. Always preparing for the next version of yourself. That effort mattered. But now, something has softened. The urgency is gone. The pressure to transform has eased. You are not chasing clarity anymore. Clarity is present. Not loud. Not dramatic. Stable. You notice it in small moments. In how you wake up. In how you breathe before speaking. In how silence no longer feels empty. Silence feels full now. Full of awareness. full of steadiness, full of space. You are no longer trying to escape yourself. That alone changes everything. When escape ends, presence begins. Presence carries a different weight. You are not measuring your days anymore, not counting wins, not tallying failures. You are living them. Living feels different than striving. Striving leans forward. Living stands upright, grounded. You still have goals, but they are not fueled by lack. They are guided by alignment. Alignment doesn't rush. You no longer need permission to rest. Rest is no longer guilt. It is maintenance. Maintenance keeps things honest. You also no longer need permission to act. Action comes clean now, without internal debate, without self-negotiation. This is what stability feels like. Not rigid, not fragile, responsive. You move when movement is needed. You pause when pausing is right. No justification. No apology. You remember how exhausting it used to be. The mental noise. The inner arguments. The constant sense of being behind. That feeling is gone. Not because life is easier, but because you are no longer divided. Division drains energy. Wholeness conserves it. When your inner life agrees with itself, movement becomes efficient. Not faster. Cleaner. You are not waiting for confidence anymore. Confidence used to be a requirement. Now it is a byproduct. It arrives after action. You also notice something else. You don't need to be seen. Visibility is no longer a hunger. It's optional. When attention arrives, you don't lean into it. When it leaves, you don't shrink. Your sense of self is no longer negotiated. It is settled. Settled doesn't mean finished. It means rooted. Rooted things grow quietly. They don't announce expansion. You look back at the earlier versions of yourself, not with embarrassment, with gratitude. They carried you here. They did the best they could with the awareness they had. You don't rewrite them. You integrate them. Integration brings peace. Peace is not excitement. It is reliability. You can count on yourself now. That trust changes your posture in the world. You stand differently. Not taller. More settled. Less reactive. When challenges arise, you don't dramatize them internally. You assess. You respond. You move forward. There is no internal audience anymore. No inner critic narrating your actions. No imaginary judge. Just presence. Presence simplifies life. When you are here, you don't live in projections. You deal with what exists. That is enough. You notice that peace has changed your relationships. You don't need intensity to feel connection. You don't need drama to feel alive. Calm allows depth. Depth lasts. Intensity fades. You choose depth now. It suits the life you're building. You also notice how little explanation you give. Not because you're closed, but because you're clear. Clarity speaks softly. When people misunderstand you, you don't rush to correct them. Understanding is no longer required for self-respect. That alone is freedom. Quiet freedom. You remember when freedom felt urgent, like something to be claimed. Now freedom feels ambient. It surrounds your choices. This is what maturity looks like. Not mastery. Acceptance. Acceptance of yourself as you are. You are not perfect. You are present. Presence compensates for imperfection. It allows correction without collapse. You still make mistakes. But mistakes no longer threaten identity. They are feedback. Feedback keeps you learning. Learning now feels natural, not forced. Curiosity replaces self-criticism. Curiosity is lighter. You are no longer waiting for life to start. You recognize it happening. In mundane moments. In routine. Routine is no longer dull. It is stabilizing. Stability allows creativity. Creativity needs safety. You've built safety inside yourself. That was the real work. Not productivity. Not achievement. Internal safety changes risk. You can try without fear. Fail without collapse. Begin again without drama. You are no longer addicted to beginnings. Beginnings used to feel hopeful. Now continuity feels richer. Staying is powerful. Staying with yourself. Staying with commitments. Staying with discomfort long enough to understand it. Understanding dissolves fear. You also notice how little you explain your discipline. Discipline has become invisible. It lives in rhythm. Rhythm sustains life. Your days are not optimized. They are coherent. Things make sense internally. That coherence creates calm. You no longer need this audiobook. That is important to say. It was a companion, not a crutch. You carry the work now. It shows in how you pause, how you decide, how you respond when no one is watching. Nothing here is dramatic. That's the point. Real change is quiet. It doesn't demand applause. You don't need another system, another framework, another reinvention. You are already living the result. This is not the end of growth. It is the end of searching. Growth continues naturally from here. Without force. You've learned how to live without negotiating with yourself. That is rare. That is valuable. That is enough. You are not behind. You are not early. You are here. That's where life is. You don't need to remember every lesson. They're embodied now. They show up automatically. In how you live. When life becomes difficult again, and it will, you won't panic. You'll return to rhythm. Rhythm always brings you back. You don't need a closing moment. Life continues after this page. Calmly. Intentionally. This book doesn't end with a call to action. You already act. It ends with recognition. Recognition of who you've become. You are someone who can be trusted with their own life. That is the real achievement. That is the quiet victory. And it requires nothing more. No proving. No forcing. No becoming. Just living. Steady. Present. Whole. Exactly where you are. For those still learning the code. If you're still here, it's not because you needed answers. It's because something inside you recognized itself. You didn't come looking to be fixed. You came looking for clarity. And clarity doesn't shout. It settles. Nothing in this audiobook asked you to become someone new. It asked you to stop abandoning who you already are. There will be moments after this when life feels familiar again. The noise returns. The pace quickens. Comfort offers its old bargains. That doesn't erase what you've learned. It tests whether you can notice it. Notice the pause before the choice. That pause is new. Before, you rushed past it. Now, you feel it. That feeling is awareness. And awareness changes everything quietly. You now understand this. Discipline isn't force. Growth isn't pressure. Peace isn't escape. Peace is strength that doesn't need noise. Comfort is relief that asks for tomorrow in return. From here on, you won't ask, "What should I do?" You'll ask, "What does this cost me later?" That question will guide you. Even when motivation disappears. You don't need to remember every word you heard. If this worked, it already lives in your behavior. In the moment you choose effort over ease. In the moment you stop negotiating with yourself. That's where the real work happens. Not in inspiration. In follow-through. This audiobook doesn't end your struggle. It ends confusion. From now on, when you feel stuck, you'll know it's not because you're incapable. It's because comfort is asking for control again. And you'll know how to respond. Not dramatically. Deliberately. If you ever drift, don't punish yourself. Return to stillness. Stillness remembers what noise makes you forget. What matters. What costs too much. If this message spoke to you, share it. Subscribe. Keep listening. This is Beyond the Noise Studio.